3 months in a hospital bed was all the time my husband Richard needed to transform from devoted spouse to master thief, draining $1.4 million from our accounts while I lay broken from a suspicious car accident that nearly killed me. But his fatal mistake was forgetting my Wall Street past and talent for hostile takeovers before I switched to biotech research. While he believed that power of attorney form I'd signed in my semi-conscious state gave him the perfect cover to steal everything we'd built together, I was already tracking his digital fingerprints and assembling a team of experts who would help me execute the most satisfying revenge, using his own corporate vulnerabilities to legally seize control of the multi-million-dollar security company he valued more than our marriage, proving that every betrayal leaves a paper trail and Richard's would lead straight to his downfall. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Ms. Calloway, these medications should help manage the pain after discharge, Dr. Sharma explained, placing a prescription sheet on my hospital tray. You've made remarkable progress considering the extent of your injuries. Another week, and we should be able to transition you to outpatient rehabilitation. I nodded, still processing the reality that after 11 weeks in this sterile room, I would soon return home. The collision that had crushed my pelvis, broken 4 ribs, and left me with a traumatic brain injury was becoming a blurry memory, eclipsed by months of surgeries and painful physical therapy. Has your husband made the necessary arrangements for home care? Dr. Sharma asked, reviewing my chart. Richard mentioned hiring someone, I replied, though I realized his visits had grown increasingly brief and infrequent over the past month. I should probably confirm the details. After the doctor left, I reached for my phone, a new one since my previous device had been destroyed in the accident. Richard had set it up for me 6 weeks ago, installing only the basic apps I'd requested. I opened the banking app, thinking I should check our joint account to understand what resources were available for my recovery. The login failed. I tried again, carefully typing each character of the password I'd used for years. Another failure. After the 3rd attempt, I was locked out completely. Strange. Richard must have changed the password for security reasons and forgotten to update me. With a sudden thought, I opened my email to search for monthly statements. Nothing in the primary folder. Nothing in spam. In fact, the last bank communication I could find was from shortly after my accident, showing our healthy joint savings of $347,000. Money we'd been setting aside for years toward early retirement. A creeping unease spread through me. I called Leslie, my closest friend and the head of legal affairs at the biotech company where I'd worked for the past 7 years. Sophia, how are you feeling today? Leslie's warm voice answered. Better physically, but something odd is happening. With our bank accounts, I explained. I can't access anything online. A weighted pause followed before Leslie replied. I was hoping to visit before discussing this, but... Sophia, Richard came by my office 2 weeks ago. He mentioned needing to consolidate your finances due to your medical expenses and asked me to review some documents. My hand tightened around the phone. What documents? A power of attorney form with your signature, authorizing him to manage all your financial affairs while you're incapacitated. It looked legitimate, so I advised him on the proper procedures. Leslie's voice had shifted to her professional tone. Has he done something concerning? I vaguely recalled signing papers during those hazy early weeks when pain medication kept me drifting in and out of lucidity. Richard had said they were insurance forms that needed immediate attention. I don't know yet, I answered truthfully. But I intend to find out. Leslie, I need a favor. Could you discreetly check if my employment status has changed in any way? Another silence. Richard submitted your resignation letter a month ago, citing your need for extended recovery. HR processed it with your accrued vacation and sick leave, and your health insurance is continuing through COBRA, which Richard set up. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implications registered. I hadn't authorized any resignation. My position as senior research analyst had taken years to achieve. It represented not just income, but professional accomplishment and purpose. "Sophia, what's going on?" Leslie asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm not entirely sure yet," I replied, my mind already calculating possibilities. "But I need your help. Can you come by the hospital tomorrow? And please, don't mention our conversation to anyone, especially not Richard." After ending the call, I lay back against the pillows, reassessing everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Richard and I had met 14 years ago when I was providing consulting services to his fledgling tech security startup, Secure Now. I had helped him structure his initial business model and secure early funding before transitioning to biotech research, which had always been my passion. We had built what I thought was a solid partnership, he with his entrepreneurial drive, me with my analytical mind. Secure Now had grown steadily over the years, recently securing major government contracts that promised to quadruple the company's value. We had celebrated that win just days before my accident. My accident. The timing suddenly struck me as suspicious. I had been driving home from a late meeting with a pharmaceutical client when a truck ran a red light and slammed into my driver's side. The investigation had ruled it a clear case of distracted driving by the truck driver who had been texting at the moment of impact. But what if there was more to it? The thought seemed paranoid, yet I couldn't dismiss it entirely. I pressed the call button, and Nurse Martinez appeared moments later. "Everything okay, Miss Calloway?" she asked, checking my vitals display out of habit. "Actually, I need a favor that's not exactly medical," I said, lowering my voice, though the private room had no other occupants. "Has my husband left any paperwork? Regarding my condition? Anything he's filed with the hospital administration?" Martinez gave me an appraising look, her 20 years of nursing experience perhaps helping her read between the lines of my request. "Let me check your file," she said, leaving briefly before returning with a tablet. "There's quite a bit here. Medical power of attorney, financial documents, insurance claims. All processed through Mr. Calloway as your designated representative. I see copies of everything, please. Hospital policy entitles me to my own records." She nodded. "I'll have everything printed for you. It might take until tomorrow morning." "That's perfect. And one more thing. Could we keep this between us? I'm trying to organize things before my discharge." Martinez's expression softened, with understanding. "Of course. I've seen enough family situations in my career to know sometimes things aren't as they appear." After she left, I opened the drawer of my bedside table, retrieving my personal tablet that Richard had reluctantly brought at my insistence weeks ago. He had seemed oddly resistant, claiming I should focus on rest rather than work or social media. Now, his concern took on a different connotation. I opened a secure browser and created a new email account unconnected to any of my existing profiles. Then I sent carefully worded messages to 3 people. My former colleague at Morgan Stanley, who now worked in forensic accounting, my college roommate who had become a private investigator specializing in digital surveillance, and my cousin James, a cybersecurity expert who had previously offered to join Secure Now, but had been politely rebuffed by Richard for reasons that never quite made sense. Each message contained only essential information, no emotional speculation, just facts and specific requests for assistance. Years of preparing meticulous research reports had taught me the value of precision and objectivity, skills that would now serve a very different purpose. By midnight, all 3 had responded, confirming they would help and requesting secure channels for communication. I provided encrypted messaging options and settled back, exhaustion from the day's revelations finally overtaking me. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The next morning, Nurse Martinez delivered a thick folder of documents, her expression neutral, but her eyes conveying silent support. I waited until she left before opening it, methodically reviewing each page with the analytical focus that had made me effective in corporate finance. The power of attorney form indeed bore my signature. Shakier than normal, but recognizably mine. It granted Richard comprehensive control over all financial matters during my period of incapacitation, with no specified end date. The resignation letter to Biogenix Pharmaceuticals also carried my signature, though this one showed subtle inconsistencies that suggested it might have been forged. Most disturbing were the bank transfer records included in my medical expense file, ostensibly to document payment for my care. Systematic withdrawals from our joint savings had begun 3 days after my accident, with funds moving to accounts I didn't recognize. The pattern showed a calculated dispersal rather than legitimate medical expenses, with amounts carefully kept below thresholds that might trigger fraud alerts. Leslie arrived at 10 a.m., bringing fresh flowers and a grim expression. "I've been doing some digging," she said after closing the door. "Richard has been restructuring SecureNow's corporate holdings over the past 2 months. He's consolidated ownership and brought in new investors, diluting the shares of several original backers in the process." "What about my shares?" I asked. "As part of our marriage agreement, I held 22% of the company in my name, compensation for my early role in establishing the business." Leslie hesitated. "According to the documents filed, you transferred your shares to Richard 8 weeks ago as part of a simplification of corporate structure in preparation for a potential acquisition." The betrayal struck like a physical blow. Those shares represented not just monetary value but recognition of my contribution to building what had become a successful enterprise. More practically, they were my financial security independent of our joint savings. "He's emptied everything," I said quietly, showing Leslie the transfer records. Joint savings, my personal account, retirement funds, company shares, all gone within weeks of my accident. Nearly $1.4 million in total, plus the share value. Leslie examined the documents, her legal mind clearly cataloging potential violations. "This goes beyond unethical into criminal territory, Sophia. The power of attorney doesn't grant him the right to appropriate your assets for personal use or corporate restructuring. At minimum, we're looking at financial exploitation and potentially fraud." "I don't just want charges filed," I replied, a cold clarity settling over me. "I want everything back, and more." He's built his company's new success on government contracts. I helped him structure and secure. If he's willing to steal from me while I recover from nearly dying, then I'm willing to take what he values most. Leslie studied me with a mixture of concern and admiration. "You're talking about taking control of SecureNow?" "Precisely." I straightened against the hospital pillows, ignoring the twinge of pain from my still-healing ribs. Richard always underestimated my understanding of corporate finance, because biotech became my focus. He's forgotten that before I specialized in pharmaceutical research, I helped structure 3 hostile takeovers at Morgan Stanley. Even so, you're talking about going up against someone who now controls all your financial resources and has spent months consolidating his position while you've been physically incapacitated. I smiled, the expression feeling foreign after months of pain and now betrayal. That's exactly the advantage I'm counting on. He thinks I'm vulnerable, oblivious, and helpless. He won't see me coming until it's too late. Leslie shook her head, but I could see the strategic part of her mind already engaging with the challenge. "What's your first move?" "Information gathering," I replied, gesturing to my tablet. "I've already engaged a forensic accountant, a digital surveillance specialist, and a cybersecurity expert. I need to understand exactly what he's done and what vulnerabilities exist in his current position. And, in the meantime, you're being discharged next week." I hadn't considered the immediate practical problem. Where would I go? Our home was in Richard's name, purchased before our marriage from his early business proceeds. I had insisted on maintaining the joint savings as my contribution to our partnership rather than adding my name to the property. I need somewhere to stay temporarily, somewhere Richard wouldn't think to look for me. Leslie nodded decisively. My brother's vacation cabin. He only uses it during hunting season, and it's equipped with satellite internet. It's remote but comfortable, and absolutely off any radar Richard might have. I can stock it with supplies, and have it ready by your discharge date. Perfect. The pieces were beginning to align. I'll need to maintain the appearance of following the expected recovery path. As far as Richard knows, I'm still a compliant patient, focused only on physical healing and oblivious to his financial maneuvers. You realize you're essentially declaring war on your husband? Leslie asked, though her tone carried no judgment. No, I corrected her, my voice steady. I'm responding to the war he declared when he decided to steal my life while I was fighting to survive. The difference is, he doesn't know the battle has begun. As Leslie prepared to leave, promising to return with secure phones and laptops, the following day, a text notification appeared on my hospital room phone. Richard, announcing he would visit that evening after a critical investor meeting. Perfect timing. I would have approximately 6 hours to prepare for my first performance. As the unwitting victim, the physical weakness from my injuries would serve as excellent cover for the emotional shock I'd need to conceal. I spent the afternoon reviewing the hospital documents repeatedly, ensuring I understood every detail of Richard's maneuvers while mentally cataloging the questions an innocent spouse would ask upon discovering financial irregularities. The balance lay in appearing concerned but not suspicious, confused but not accusatory. By the time the door opened at 7:30 p.m., I had transformed back into the recovering patient, still formidable in intellect, but presumed ignorant of betrayal. Richard entered carrying a small bouquet of lilies, my second favorite flower, though I'd reminded him countless times I preferred orchids, and wearing the confident expression of a man who believed himself unchallenged. Looking at him now, I wondered how I'd missed the signs. Had the calculating coldness always lurked behind those blue eyes, or had it developed gradually over our years together? Had our marriage been another strategic acquisition for him, valued only as long as it served his purposes? It didn't matter. The man who had sat by my bedside in those first terrifying days after the accident, who had promised to handle everything while I recovered, who had built a life with me over 12 years, that man was as broken as my body had been. But unlike my physical injuries, this relationship would never heal. "Hey there, fighter," he greeted with practiced warmth, leaning to kiss my forehead. "How's my favorite patient doing today?" I allowed a small smile, one that reached my eyes. Through years of corporate negotiations where displaying the right emotion was often crucial to success. "Better," I replied. "Dr. Sharma says I might be discharged next week. We should start planning for home care." A flicker of something, concern, calculation, crossed his features before the supportive expression returned. "That's wonderful. News, though earlier than expected. Are they sure you're ready?" The question carried a subtle edge I might have missed before. Was he genuinely concerned about my health or worried about his timeline being disrupted? "Apparently, my recovery is exceeding expectations," I said, watching him carefully. I was thinking about practical matters today and tried to check our accounts to see what resources we have for a home health aide. Strangely, I couldn't access anything online. Richard's response was smooth, clearly prepared. "I changed all the passwords during the security breach at my company last month. Didn't want to burden you with technical details during recovery." He pulled out his phone. "I can update your access now if you'd like." A plausible explanation for the locked accounts, but not for the missing funds or transferred shares. I decided to press slightly further. That would be helpful. Also, I couldn't find any recent bank statements in my email. Have those been going to you instead? He hesitated fractionally longer this time. "I consolidated our accounts to simplify things while you're recovering. The medical bills have been substantial, and juggling multiple accounts became unnecessarily complicated." His tone remained casual as he added, "I've handled everything, Sophia. You don't need to worry about finances right now." The practiced ease of his deception was almost admirable. Had I not seen the transfer records, I might have accepted his explanation without question. "You're probably right," I conceded, allowing fatigue to seep into my voice, not entirely feigned after the emotional revelations of the day. "It's just strange not having any visibility after managing our investments for so long." Richard sat beside the bed, taking my hand in a gesture that once would have felt comforting, but now seemed performative. "I know how important control is, to you, but sometimes we have to trust others to take care of things. Right now, your only job is getting stronger." The irony was almost painful. He was using my recovery as the perfect cover to justify keeping me in the dark about his systematic theft. "You're right," I said, squeezing his hand and noticing how he subtly checked his watch. Platinum, new, and definitely not within our previous joint spending agreements. "How's the company doing? Any progress with those government contracts?" His face brightened with genuine enthusiasm, the most authentic emotion he'd displayed since arriving. "Actually, that's why I'm running late tonight. We just secured Phase 2 of the Department of Defense Cybersecurity Initiative. It's triple the value of the initial contract, with potential expansions that could make SecureNow the industry leader within 18 months. Contracts I had helped him structure and negotiate through my pharmaceutical industry connections, leveraging my understanding of how government security procurement worked. Contracts that would now benefit him exclusively while I was left with nothing. "That's amazing, Richard. I'm so proud of you." The words tasted like ash, but years of corporate negotiations had taught me to separate personal feelings from strategic objectives. "We should celebrate when I'm discharged." "Absolutely," he agreed, checking his watch again. "Listen, I hate to cut this short, but I've got an investor call in 30 minutes. Critical funding round with the expansion moving forward. I'll come by tomorrow with lunch from that Italian place you like." As he leaned in for a goodbye kiss, I noticed the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume, a detail that might have devastated me hours earlier, but now merely added another data point to my assessment. The betrayal extended beyond finances, it seemed. "Look forward to it," I replied, maintaining my facade of ignorance. "Don't worry about me. As you said, my only job right now is getting stronger." He had no idea how literal that statement would become, nor how his own words would prove prophetic in ways he never intended. After he left, I immediately documented everything about our interaction, sending encrypted notes to my small but growing team of allies. Richard's confidence that I remained oblivious would be his most significant vulnerability, one I intended to exploit to its fullest potential. Leslie's text arrived shortly after. "Cabin secured. Operation Recovery begins next week." A fitting name for what lay ahead. I would recover not just my physical health, but everything Richard had taken and more. The game had begun, with Richard believing himself the only player, when in fact, he was merely a piece on my emerging chessboard. The cabin was exactly what I needed, remote enough to ensure privacy, yet equipped with modern amenities and high-speed satellite internet. Nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the property featured panoramic views that would have been therapeutic under different circumstances. Today, those vistas were merely the backdrop to what had become my war room. "Your physical therapist will arrive at 9 tomorrow," Leslie said, setting down the last of my medical equipment. "She's my cousin's wife and completely trustworthy. Richard won't be able to track these sessions back to you." I nodded, surveying the living area we'd transformed into a combination recovery space and operational headquarters. 3 laptop computers occupied the reclaimed wood dining table, each dedicated to a different aspect of my evolving strategy. A large whiteboard dominated one wall, already filled with timelines, corporate structures, and financial flows mapping out Richard's activities over the past 3 months. "How did the discharge go?" Leslie asked, settling into an armchair across from my specially ordered medical recliner. "Exactly as planned," I replied, adjusting my position to ease the persistent ache in my hip. "Richard arrived with flowers, and that concerned expression he's perfected. I played the role of the obedient patient, expressing appropriate anxiety about leaving the hospital but gratitude for his ongoing support. The discharge had been a delicate performance. I'd needed to appear simultaneously vulnerable enough to maintain Richard's confidence in his deception, yet strong enough to be released without suspicion. The reluctance of my medical team to discharge me to a remote cabin had been overcome by Leslie's brother, Dr. James Wheeler, who had arranged to be my supervising physician of record. "And he has no idea you're here rather than at the rehabilitation center?" "None. The transfer paperwork lists New Horizons Rehabilitation as my destination, and their records show my admission. Dr. Wheeler handled that personally. New Horizons, an exclusive facility where privacy was paramount, had agreed to maintain the fiction of my residence for a substantial donation to their patient assistance fund. As far as Richard knew, I was safely contained in a controlled environment for at least another month, focusing solely on physical recovery while he continued consolidating his position. "Your team has been busy," Leslie noted, gesturing toward the whiteboard. "Care to walk me through what you've discovered?" I reached for my tablet, bringing up the comprehensive report my forensic accountant had delivered yesterday. Richard began moving money 3 days after my accident, before he even had the power of attorney. Small transfers at first, testing whether any automated alerts would trigger. "That would constitute straightforward fraud," Leslie observed, her legal mind clearly cataloging violations. "Exactly. Once he had the POA a week later, he accelerated the process. Our joint savings was drained systematically over 2 weeks, with funds moving through a series of shell companies before landing in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Singapore." I swiped to the next screen, revealing a complex flow chart. But that was just the beginning. Using my forged signature, he transferred my company shares to himself, then immediately leveraged them as collateral for a high-interest loan from Meridian Capital. Leslie frowned. "Meridian is known for predatory lending practices in corporate finance. Why would he risk dealing with them?" "Because he needed immediate liquidity for this," I explained, bringing up a news article from 6 weeks ago. Quantum Defense Technologies, a direct competitor to SecureNow that held patents Richard has coveted for years. The acquisition was announced 4 weeks after my accident, framed as a strategic consolidation in the cybersecurity sector. Understanding dawned on Leslie's face. "He used your money to buy the company he couldn't previously afford. And my shares as leverage," I confirmed. "The timing suggests this wasn't opportunistic. The negotiations with Quantum would have begun months before my accident. Richard needed substantial capital quickly, and my hospitalization provided the perfect cover." Leslie's expression darkened. "That raises disturbing questions about the accident itself." I nodded grimly. "My PI has been investigating. The truck driver who hit me was initially charged with distracted driving based on phone records showing a text sent at the time of impact. But deeper analysis revealed unusual activity on his banking app 3 days after the accident, a $50,000 deposit from a shell corporation linked to one of Richard's college roommates. The implication hung heavy in the mountain air between us. We were no longer discussing simple financial fraud, but potentially attempted murder disguised as a traffic accident. The possibility had haunted my recovery from the moment the suspicious transfer patterns began emerging. "We need concrete evidence before pursuing that angle," I cautioned the analyst, even when discussing my own near-death. "The financial trail is damning but circumstantial. The driver claims the money was an insurance settlement from a previous incident." Leslie paced the room, her legal training visibly wrestling with friendly concern. "Evidence aside, Sophia, we need to consider your safety. If Richard orchestrated the accident, he believes I'm safely contained and oblivious." I interrupted. "That perception is our greatest asset right now. Besides, moving against him legally for the accident would alert him to my awareness of the financial fraud." I gestured toward the second laptop, which displayed SecureNow's current corporate structure. This is where we focus our efforts. Richard has created significant vulnerabilities in his rush to expand. The visualization showed how Secure Now had transformed over the past 3 months. What had been a stable, moderately successful cybersecurity firm with conservative growth had morphed into an aggressively leveraged conglomerate. Richard had acquired 3 companies beyond quantum defense, each purchase increasing the corporate debt load. The Meridian loan has specific performance requirements, I explained, highlighting a section of the financing documents my team had obtained. If Secure Now misses revenue targets for 2 consecutive quarters, Meridian can call the loan or convert their position to a controlling equity stake. Leslie studied the documents with growing interest. And your shares, which he's using as collateral? Therein lies his critical mistake, I replied, feeling the first genuine smile in months form on my lips. The power of attorney he obtained grants him authority to manage my assets, but not to transfer ownership without explicit consent. My signature on the share transfer document can be proven fraudulent by forensic analysis. Understanding bloomed in Leslie's expression. If the share transfer is invalidated, his loan collateral disappears, I finished, triggering an automatic default under Meridian's terms. But Meridian would still control the company's fate, not you. I swiped to the final screen on my tablet, revealing communications between my cousin James and several key figures in the cybersecurity industry. That's where the next phase comes in. James has been quietly approaching Secure Now's original investors, the ones Richard pushed aside during his rapid expansion. They're not happy about their diluted positions. The plan was taking shape in Leslie's eyes as she processed the strategy. You're forming a coalition to counter Meridian when the loan defaults. Precisely. Between my rightful shares, the original investors, and key technology partners who are concerned about Richard's leadership, we'll have sufficient capital to satisfy Meridian's position and assume control of Secure Now. Leslie shook, her head impressed despite her concerns. This is why Richard should have remembered your background in corporate finance before stealing from you. People see what they expect to see, I observed, closing the tablet. Richard saw me as the scientist I became, forgetting the strategist I was before. His perception of me as vulnerable and financially naive is the foundation of his downfall. The remainder of the evening was spent refining timelines and communication protocols. My team, now expanded to include Leslie's legal expertise, operated with the precision of a military unit preparing for a complex operation. Each person had clearly defined responsibilities and secure communication channels. Information was compartmentalized to ensure no single point of vulnerability could compromise the overall strategy. As the dark mountain night enveloped the cabin, Leslie prepared to leave, promising to return in 3 days with updates from corporate, filings she could access without raising suspicions. "Are you sure you'll be all right here alone?" she asked, hesitating at the door. "The night nurse won't arrive until tomorrow." "I've been alone for months," I replied quietly. Even when Richard was sitting beside my hospital bed, I was alone. I just didn't know it then. After Leslie departed, I maneuvered carefully to the bedroom, my movements still hampered by healing, bones and weakened muscles. Physical therapy had restored much of my mobility, but recovery remained an ongoing battle against pain and limitation. Tonight, however, the physical discomfort was overshadowed by a deeper ache, the grief of recognizing that my 12-year marriage had been, in many ways, an illusion. I settled into bed, propped up by the specialized pillows that made sleep possible despite my injuries, and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Richard and I had met during what was supposed to be my temporary consulting assignment for his fledgling company. His enthusiasm for cybersecurity innovation had been contagious, his vision for protecting vulnerable systems against emerging threats genuinely impressive. I had fallen in love not just with the man but with his passion and purpose. When asked me to assist with the business model and initial funding strategy, I'd done so gladly. leveraging my Morgan Stanley connections to secure meetings with potential investors who would normally have ignored a startup with little more than promising concepts. Secure Now's early success coincided with my growing interest in biotechnology. I'd been offered a research position at Biogenics that aligned perfectly with my interest in medical data security. Richard had supported the career transition, even as my income initially decreased from banking to research. We had seemed like the perfect partnership, his entrepreneurial drive complemented by my analytical precision, his growing company balanced by my scientific pursuits. When did it change? Was there a specific moment when partnership became vulnerable in his eyes, when I transformed from ally to obstacle? Or had I simply failed to recognize his true nature all along, seeing the man I wanted him to be rather than the one he actually was? The questions brought no comfort, no clarity. Only the cold reality remained. While I had built a life partnership, Richard had constructed an elaborate contingency plan that included eliminating me when financially expedient. My phone chimed, softly with an encrypted message from James. Access achieved. Monitoring communications as discussed. Will report significant findings. The message confirmed that my cousin had successfully installed monitoring software on Secure Now's internal systems, a task made easier by his previous collaboration with several of the company's senior engineers who remained unaware of his connection to me. We now had eyes inside Richard's corporate world, visibility into communications and decisions that would inform our counter-moves. I sent a brief acknowledgement and set the phone aside, turning instead to the notebook where I tracked my physical recovery. Documenting range of motion, pain levels, and medication effects helped maintain the analytical distance that kept me functioning, despite emotional upheaval. Tonight, the metrics showed improvement across all measures, tangible evidence that, even as one aspect of my life had shattered, another was steadily rebuilding. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Physical rehabilitation required acknowledging damage, establishing baseline capabilities, setting recovery targets, and methodically working toward restoration. My approach to Richard's betrayal followed the same principles: assess the damage, understand current position, establish clear objectives, implement strategic interventions. The parallel brought an unexpected sense of calm. This was familiar territory, merely applied to an unfamiliar context. Corporate takeovers and physical rehabilitation shared core methodologies: identify vulnerabilities, leverage strengths, execute with precision and patience. Morning arrived with pale mountain light filtering through pine branches outside my window. I had slept surprisingly well, perhaps due to the clarity that came with decisive action. My physical therapist, Elena, a former Olympic gymnast with specialized training in trauma recovery, arrives precisely at 9, bringing professional efficiency and refreshing honesty to my rehabilitation. "You're compensating with your right," sighed, she observed as I demonstrated my current walking capacity. "It's creating an imbalance that will cause problems later. We need to strengthen the left hip flexors before that pattern becomes habitual." For the next hour, she guided me through exercises specifically designed to address the muscular imbalances resulting from my injuries. Unlike the hospital therapists who had focused on basic mobility, Elena approached recovery as performance optimization, a perspective that aligned perfectly with my own goal-oriented mindset. "You've made remarkable progress considering the extent of your injuries," she commented as we concluded the session. "Most patients with similar trauma would still be significantly more limited." "I have compelling motivation," I replied, carefully, lowering myself into the recliner. Elena smiled knowingly as she packed her equipment. "Revenge is powerful fuel for recovery. Just don't let it burn you in the process." Her unexpected insight caught me off guard. "Leslie told you?" "Only that your husband betrayed you while you were hospitalized," she shrugged. "The rest is written in how you push through pain during exercises. I've worked with enough athletes. To recognize the difference between someone recovering to return to normal life and someone preparing for competition. Her observation was uncomfortably accurate. I was approaching rehabilitation with the same intensity I applied to the financial strategy, as preparation for victory rather than merely healing. The best revenge is success, Elena added as she prepared to leave. But success requires sustainability. Push too hard physically, and you'll create new injuries that delay your ultimate goal. After she departed, I reflected on her warning, while reviewing messages from my team. The forensic accountant had completed tracing all financial transfers, documenting approximately $1.4 million moved from my accounts to offshore holdings. My private investigator had identified 3 additional shell companies connected to Richard's college roommate, each showing suspicious transfers surrounding my accident. James reported increasing tension within SecureNow's executive team regarding the aggressive expansion and mounting debt obligations. Most significantly, Leslie had uncovered documentation indicating Richard had begun exploring options to declare me mentally incapacitated due to traumatic brain injury, a move that would convert his temporary financial control to permanent guardianship. The discovery sent ice through my veins despite the warm mountain morning. My phone rang with Richard's daily check-in, a ritual he maintained to preserve the appearance of the concerned husband while gathering information about my awareness and progress. "Good morning, fighter." His voice came through with practiced warmth. "How's rehab treating you today?" I slipped effortlessly into the role I'd been perfecting, slightly foggy from medication, focused primarily on physical challenges, and completely unaware of financial concerns. "The therapists are brutal," I replied with manufactured weariness. "Everything hurts, but they say that's progress." "That's my girl always pushing through." His praise carried the condescending tone one might use with a child. "Any word on when they might release you to home care?" The question contained his real interest, timeline information to support his planning. I provided the answer my team and I had prepared, designed to give him false confidence. At least another 3 weeks of intensive therapy, maybe longer. The cognitive specialists want to run more tests next week. I injected a note of confusion into my voice. Something about decision-making capacity assessments. The bait was taken immediately. Decision-making capacity? Did they explain why that's necessary? "Not really," I murmured, as if struggling to recall details. Something about trauma patients sometimes needing assistance with complex judgments for a while. "It's all very technical." His tone shifted to soothing reassurance, though I could hear the calculation beneath. "Don't worry about any of that. I'll speak with your doctors and make sure everything is handled properly. You just focus on those exercises." "Thanks, Richard. I don't know what I'd do without you managing everything." The irony of my statement was lost on him, filtered through his perception of me as diminished. After promising to visit that weekend, a visit that would be deflected through carefully orchestrated medical procedures, Richard ended the call. I immediately sent recordings and notes to Leslie, highlighting his interest in the cognitive assessment reference. Her response was swift. "He's accelerating the guardianship strategy. This gives us the timeline we needed." Indeed, Richard's reaction confirmed our suspicions and clarified his intentions. He wasn't simply draining accounts opportunistically. He was executing a comprehensive plan to assume permanent control of all my assets through legal channels that would be difficult to challenge once established. What he couldn't know was that every inquiry he made about my cognitive status, every medical record he requested, every consultation with lawyers specializing in guardianship proceedings created a documented trail of his intentions. Each move strengthened the case we were building, not just for financial recovery but for criminal prosecution. I turned to the third laptop, the one dedicated to monitoring SecureNow's internal operations through James's access. Recent communications showed Richard scheduling an emergency board meeting for the following week, ostensibly to discuss succession, planning and leadership transition in light of recent acquisitions. The timing aligned perfectly with his interest in my cognitive assessments. He was preparing to consolidate both personal and professional control, leveraging my supposed incapacity to justify his complete takeover of the company we had built together. I messaged James. Accelerate investor outreach. Timeline compressed. His acknowledgement came with additional information. Meridian Capital reviewing Q2 projections. Numbers don't align with loan covenants. Internal forecast shows a 22% revenue shortfall. The pieces were falling into place faster than anticipated. Secure Now was already failing to meet the performance requirements Richard had agreed to in his haste to secure financing. The first quarterly review was approaching, and the company would fall significantly short of projections. When Meridian inevitably raised concerns, Richard would need to provide additional collateral or face potential default, precisely when our challenge to the fraudulent share transfer would undermine his position most effectively. I adjusted the timeline on our whiteboard, moving several key actions forward by 2 weeks. The accelerated schedule would put additional pressure on my physical recovery. I would need to be substantially more functional than initially planned when the confrontation occurred. As if sensing my thoughts, Elena's parting words echoed in my mind. Push too hard physically, and you'll create new injuries that delay your ultimate goal. The warning gave me pause. Survival had taught me to recognize the difference between necessary risk and self-sabotage. I modified the timeline again, building in contingencies that would allow the strategy to proceed even if my personal participation needed to be temporarily limited. The true strength of my position wasn't physical presence, but strategic positioning. Richard believed he was executing a complex financial and legal maneuver against an oblivious, incapacitated opponent. That perception, not my physical capability, was our greatest advantage. I sent a final message to my team before beginning. The afternoon self-directed physical therapy exercises. Operation Recovery entering acceleration phase. All units proceed with contingency timeline alpha. The response from each team member came back in sequence. Simple acknowledgments that belied the complex activities they represented. The machinery was in motion, each component synchronized, toward a single objective, the systematic dismantling of Richard's carefully constructed scheme. As I began the painful process of rebuilding atrophied muscles, I reflected on the parallel processes underway, my body reconstructing its strength, even as my team reconstructed the corporate entity Richard had attempted to steal. Both required patience, precision, and persistence. Both would ultimately succeed not through brute force, but through strategic application of pressure at key vulnerability points. Richard had spent 3 months executing what he believed was the perfect plan. He had no idea that in those same 3 months, I had been developing something far more devastating, not just recovery, but reclamation on a scale he couldn't imagine. Richard's first inkling that his perfect plan might be unraveling came exactly 17 days after my supposed admission to New Horizons Rehabilitation Center. I monitored his growing concern through multiple channels, his increasingly frequent calls to my treatment team, James's access to his corporate communications, and most revealingly, the private investigator I'd hired to observe his daily movements. He visited New Horizons yesterday, Meera Patel, my PI, reported during our encrypted video call, arrived at 2:15 p.m. with flowers, spoke with administrative staff for approximately 20 minutes, then left looking agitated. I nodded, visualizing the scene. Richard would have maintained his composure during the conversation. He was too skilled at corporate negotiations to show obvious frustration, but the staff had been thoroughly briefed on providing vague, privacy policy-centered responses to his inquiries. Did he try to escalate to management? I asked. Attempted to speak with the medical director, who was unavailable. He left his card with a request for an urgent call back. Mira's precise observations reflected her background in behavioral analysis at the FBI before entering private practice. Body language indicated controlled anger, tight jaw, rigid posture, repetitive finger tapping on the reception counter. The response aligned perfectly with our strategy. New Horizons had agreed to confirm my admission, but cite privacy regulations regarding specific treatment details or visitation. The medical director, a former colleague of Leslie's brother, would return Richard's call tomorrow with professionally sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful information about complex cases requiring specialized isolation protocols. "Any surveillance concerns?" I asked, thinking of Richard's cybersecurity expertise. "None detected. He's relying on his status as your husband and medical proxy rather than technical measures. No indication of physical surveillance being deployed around the facility." This confirmed our psychological assessment. Richard's confidence in his legal maneuvering made him less likely to resort to invasive monitoring. He believed the guardianship proceedings would give him all the access and control he needed. "What about personal movements?" I asked, moving to the next item on our intelligence agenda. Mira's expression shifted slightly, her professional detachment momentarily colored by something like distaste. "He's been spending evenings at a penthouse apartment in Westwood, purchased 3 weeks after your accident under a shell company named Ascension Holdings. And he's not alone at this apartment," I stated, rather than asked, already anticipating the confirmation. "Correct. A woman, approximately 30, blonde, has been present during each evening observation. Vehicle records identify her as Cynthia Mercer, VP of Business Development at Meridian Capital." The pieces clicked into place with cold precision. Richard's unusually favorable loan terms from a notoriously predatory lender suddenly made perfect sense. His relationship with Meridian's executive went beyond professional and likely predated my accident by months. "Interesting," I said, maintaining analytical distance despite the personal implications. So Meridian's unusual investment interest in SecureNow had additional motivation. Based on timeline analysis, their relationship began approximately 4 months before your accident, Mira confirmed. Electronic records show dinner reservations, hotel bookings, and gift purchases dating to that period. 4 months, while I had been working 14-hour days on a breakthrough biotech research project. Richard had been cultivating both a personal affair and financial relationship with the woman who would later help him leverage my assets. The apartment purchase suggests he was planning a significant lifestyle change, I noted, focusing on strategic implications rather than emotional impact, consistent with the guardianship strategy, establishing a new permanent residence while maintaining the legal fiction of our marriage. Mira nodded. The penthouse was fully furnished through an interior design service 10 weeks ago. This wasn't an impulsive decision. After concluding the briefing with Mira, I updated our situation board, adding the new information to our timeline. The emotional betrayal, discovering Richard's affair, was secondary to its strategic implications. His relationship with Cynthia Mercer created both vulnerability and opportunity for our counter-operation. My phone chimed with an encrypted message from Leslie. "Court record search complete. Petition for guardianship prepared but not yet filed. Attorney is Martin Wells from Truman and Brooks." Martin Wells, a name I recognized immediately. He had been Richard's fraternity brother in college, though Richard had always maintained they were merely casual acquaintances. The connection reinforced the deliberate, premeditated nature of the plan. Richard had been assembling allies and resources for this maneuver long before my accident. I responded to Leslie. Timeline acceleration confirmed. Move to Phase 2. Phase 2 involved a carefully orchestrated leak of information to specific members of the financial and technology press. Journalists known for covering the cybersecurity industry who had previously reported on SecureNow's government contracts. They would receive anonymized documentation showing concerning patterns in the company's recent acquisitions, highlighting the unusual debt structure and potential conflicts of interest in the Meridian financing. The coverage wouldn't be enough to trigger immediate regulatory intervention, but would create sufficient industry chatter to make Meridian's risk management team take a closer look at their exposure, precisely when Richard needed them to remain confident in SecureNow's projections. My afternoon physical therapy session with Elena proved particularly challenging. The accelerated timeline meant pushing recovery limits I'd previously approached more cautiously. "Your left side stability has improved significantly," Elena noted as I completed a series of balance exercises. "But you're still favoring the right hip during weight transfers. We need to address that before attempting stairs independently." "How quickly can we progress?" I asked, not bothering to mask the urgency in my voice. Elena studied me with professional assessment. "You're asking because the timeline has changed." It wasn't a question, but I nodded confirmation anyway. "Physical recovery doesn't follow corporate scheduling," she cautioned. "But with additional daily sessions and absolutely perfect adherence to the home exercise program." She paused, calculating. "We might achieve functional mobility 2 weeks, earlier than initially projected, with limitations." "Define functional mobility," I pressed, toweling perspiration from my face. "Independent transfers, level surface walking without assistive devices, single flight of stairs with handrail support." She listed the benchmarks with clinical precision. "But not prolonged standing, not complex terrain navigation, not pain-free movement." I considered the parameters against our operational requirements. The confrontation with Richard would likely occur in corporate settings, offices, conference rooms, spaces with reasonable accessibility. I wouldn't need to navigate challenging physical environments, just maintain composure and presence during critical interactions. That works, I decided. "Let's intensify the program." Elena nodded, though her expression conveyed professional reservation. "We'll need to monitor pain levels carefully. Pushing too hard creates setbacks, I know," I interrupted. "But sometimes calculated risks are necessary." "Your body, your choice," she conceded. "But as your therapist, I'm documenting my recommendation for a more graduated progression." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of intelligence updates and physical exertion. James reported increasing tension within SecureNow's executive team regarding the recent acquisitions. The integration of quantum defense technologies was proving more complicated than projected, with key engineering talent departing amid concerns about corporate culture changes. Most significantly, the first anonymized media inquiries had reached SecureNow's communications department, seeking comment on unusual financing arrangements and potential regulatory concerns regarding government contracts. The queries had been forwarded to Richard with urgent priority flags. By evening, I was physically exhausted but mentally energized by the accelerating momentum. Richard's carefully constructed world was beginning to experience tremors, small disruptions that would compound into significant instability over the coming days. My nightly check-in call with Richard confirmed the effectiveness of our initial moves. His voice carried a tightness that hadn't been present in previous calls, a subtle tension beneath the practiced concern. "I stopped by New Horizons today," he mentioned with forced casualness. "They're being ridiculously strict about their visitation policies." "COVID protocols," I murmured vaguely, reinforcing the explanation the facility would have provided. "Everything's very regulated here." "They wouldn't even confirm which treatment programs you're participating in," he continued, probing for information. "Don't they understand I'm your husband? I'm responsible for your care decisions." The possessive phrasing, "responsible for your care decisions," revealed his guardianship mindset. He already viewed my autonomy as something he controlled rather than respected. "The isolation is difficult," I admitted, allowing genuine emotion to color my voice. "But the doctors say it's necessary for the cognitive recovery program." His interest sharpened immediately. "Cognitive recovery? What exactly are they doing for that?" "Tests and exercises," I replied with deliberate vagueness. "Memory sequences, decision-making scenarios. They said something about establishing baseline capacity." I let my voice trail off as if struggling to recall details. "That's good," Richard assured me, the predatory eagerness barely concealed. "Very important for your long-term recovery. Have they mentioned any formal assessments of your decision-making capacity?" The direct question confirmed our intelligence regarding the guardianship petition. He needed documented evidence of cognitive impairment to support his legal case. "I think so," I responded uncertainty. "There was a form they mentioned. Something about competency evaluation? I signed authorization for it yesterday. Or maybe the day before. The days blend together here. The fabricated information would send him pursuing documentation that didn't exist, creating frustration and potential missteps as he pressed new horizons for assessment results they couldn't provide. "Don't worry about the details," he soothed, clearly pleased by my apparent confusion and compliance. "I'll follow up with your treatment team. Just focus on those exercises." After ending the call, I immediately documented the conversation for Leslie, highlighting Richard's specific interest in competency assessments. His focus on establishing my supposed cognitive deficits would become a critical vulnerability in our counteroffensive, evidence of intent that would support both civil and potential criminal proceedings. The following morning brought the next phase of our strategy into motion. The first industry blog post appeared, titled, "SecureNow's Acquisition Spree Raises Questions About Debt Structure." The article itself was relatively balanced, raising questions rather than making accusations, but its timing was perfectly calculated. To coincide with SecureNow's quarterly financial review, James forwarded internal communications showing Richard's increasingly agitated responses as additional media inquiries followed. By midday, he had scheduled an emergency call with Meridian Capital's risk assessment team, a conversation that would inevitably involve Cynthia Mercer in her professional capacity. "He's feeling pressure on multiple fronts," I observed during our daily strategy call with Leslie and James. The rehabilitation center stonewalled his requests for detailed medical reports, media questioning his business decisions, and now Meridian wanting explanations about financial projections. James nodded in agreement. Internal communications show he's pulling the executive team into crisis response mode. Multiple all-hands meetings, demanding revised financial projections by end of day. He's setting an unsustainable operational tempo. "Exactly as intended," Leslie noted. "Pressure creates mistakes. How's the investor coalition progressing?" 7 of the original 9 investors have expressed interest in our counter-proposal, James reported, collectively representing 31% of pre-dilution equity. With Sophia's recovered 22%, we're approaching the majority position. The coalition was the cornerstone of our long-term strategy, a group of early investors in SecureNow who had been sidelined during Richard's aggressive expansion. Their frustration with reduced influence and diluted equity made them natural allies in our effort to restructure the company's leadership. "And Meridian's position?" I asked, shifting focus to our most unpredictable variable. Leslie consulted her notes. "Their loan covenants give them conversion rights to 26% equity in default scenarios. Combined with our coalition, that would create a controlling interest sufficient to remove Richard from leadership. Assuming Meridian cooperates rather than supporting Richard," I cautioned. "Cynthia Mercer's personal relationship complicates their institutional decision-making, which is why our next move involves their risk management committee," Leslie replied with the slight smile that had intimidated opposing counsel throughout her legal career. "Anonymous package arriving tomorrow containing documentation of Richard's guardianship petition alongside evidence of his relationship with their VP. The approach was calculated to create maximum institutional concern within Meridian without directly threatening their financial position. Corporate lenders despised personal complications that could create conflicts of interest or public relations problems. Cynthia Mercer's undisclosed relationship with the CEO of a major client would trigger immediate internal review, especially when paired with evidence of potential financial impropriety. "Timeline for the share transfer challenge?" I asked, moving To the final element of our immediate strategy. Filing prepared, Leslie confirmed. We'll submit immediately after Richard files the guardianship petition. The contrast between his attempt to have you declared incompetent and your simultaneously detailed legal challenge creates exactly the judicial uncertainty we need. The strategy leveraged fundamental contradictions in Richard's approach. He couldn't simultaneously argue I was incapable of making financial decisions while defending against a precisely constructed legal challenge to his fraudulent share transfer. Each argument undermined the other, creating a legal paradox that would stall his proceedings while accelerating ours. Physical recovery status? James asked, his concern for my well-being momentarily overriding strategic considerations. Improving daily, I replied with more confidence than my aching body warranted. Elena's accelerated program is challenging but effective. I'll be mobility ready when the confrontation phase begins. Our meeting concluded with assignments for the next operational period. Leslie would finalize the legal filings while continuing to monitor court records for Richard's guardianship petition. James would manage the investor coalition communications and maintain surveillance of SecureNow's internal systems. My focus remained on physical rehabilitation and managing Richard's perception of my condition through our daily calls. That afternoon brought unexpected acceleration to our timeline. Mira reported Richard making an unscheduled visit to his attorney's office, remaining for over 3 hours before departing with a portfolio of documents. Surveillance photos showed the labeled tab of one document partially visible, Emergency Guardianship Petition. He's moving faster than projected, Leslie observed when I forwarded the intelligence. The media pressure and Meridian's inquiries have created more urgency than we anticipated. Good, I replied, already adjusting our response sequence. The faster he moves, the more corners he cuts. Errors create opportunities. Leslie's response came with uncharacteristic hesitation. Are you sure you're ready for this acceleration? Once we counterfile, everything happens in real time. No more controlled environment. The question warranted honest assessment. My physical recovery had progressed significantly but remained incomplete. Pain was a constant companion, mobility still limited compared to my pre-accident capabilities. Yet the strategic advantage of Richard's rushing outweighed the risk of my physical limitations. I'm ready, I confirmed. Authorize the surveillance team to maintain 24-hour observation of court filing offices. The moment Richard submits the guardianship petition, we initiate the full counter-response. That evening, Richard's call came later than usual and lasted half the normal duration. His distraction was evident in cursory questions about my treatment and rushed assurances about handling financial matters. The conversation confirmed our assessment. He was fully focused on executing his legal maneuver, confident that I remained safely contained and oblivious. When the call ended, I moved to the window overlooking the mountain valley, watching darkness settle over the landscape. 3 months ago, I had awakened in a hospital room with shattered bones and no memory of the accident that had nearly claimed my life. I had trusted Richard to manage our affairs while I focused on survival and recovery, believing our 12-year marriage represented partnership and mutual protection. The depth of his betrayal, financial, emotional, potentially even orchestrating, the accident itself, had initially seemed insurmountable. Yet in recognizing the full scope of his deception, I had rediscovered capacities I'd set aside years ago. The corporate strategist who had orchestrated complex financial maneuvers, the analyst who found patterns in apparent chaos, the negotiator who identified and exploited vulnerabilities, these aspects of myself had re-emerged stronger than before. My phone chimed with an urgent message from our court surveillance team. Target has entered downtown courthouse with counsel, moving to Position Alpha. Position Alpha, our observer stationed near the probate filing office, ready to confirm, when Richard submitted the guardianship petition. The moment that document entered the legal system, our counter-strategy would activate across multiple fronts simultaneously. I sent the standby alert to our entire team. Countdown initiated. All units prepare for Phase 3 activation. The response came from Leslie first. Legal team standing by. Documents prepared for immediate filing. Then James. Technical systems monitoring active. Investor communications ready. Finally, Mira. Surveillance teams in position at all designated locations. As I settled into the medical recliner that had become my command center, I reflected on Richard's fundamental miscalculation. He had seen my injured body and assumed a broken spirit. He had interpreted my scientific focus as abandonment of financial acumen. Most critically, he had mistaken my trust for weakness. In underestimating me so completely, he had created the perfect conditions for his own downfall. The emergency guardianship petition he now rushed to file, designed to render me powerless, would instead trigger the mechanism of his complete professional and personal destruction. My phone chimed again. Petition filed at 7:42 p.m. Document number GM 2023-114587. I sent the execution order with 3 simple words. Initiate Phase 3. Across the city, our carefully positioned assets began moving in synchronized precision. Leslie's legal team submitted our counterfilings electronically, challenging the fraudulent share transfer and seeking emergency injunctive relief against Richard's financial maneuvers. James activated the prepared communications to the investor coalition and key regulatory contacts. Mira's surveillance teams shifted to heightened observation of Richard, Cynthia Mercer, and the Secure Now executive offices. By morning, Richard would discover that his perfect plan had catastrophically backfired, that the wife he believed confined and incapacitated had orchestrated a counteroffensive designed to reclaim not just her stolen assets, but his entire company. I closed my eyes, visualizing the cascade of events now set in motion. The first signs of trouble Richard had detected, media inquiries, rehabilitation center stonewalling, Meridian's financial questions, had been merely preliminary tremors. The earthquake had just begun, with Richard standing directly above the epicenter, completely unaware of the ground shifting beneath his feet. Richard's world began collapsing at precisely 8:17 a.m. the following morning. I watched the sequence unfold through multiple digital channels. James's access to Secure Now's internal communications, Leslie's legal monitoring system, and Mira's real-time surveillance reports. Each provided a different perspective on the same unfolding catastrophe. The first blow came from the court system. Richard's attorney received automated notification that an emergency injunction had been filed against his guardianship petition, challenging its validity based on fraudulent financial transactions and breach of fiduciary duty. The filing included comprehensive documentation of Richard's systematic draining of my accounts, complete with forensic financial analysis and authentication evidence. Martin Wells is calling Richard now, Mira reported, monitoring the attorney's office. Conversation appears heated based on visible gestures through office windows. Within minutes, Secure Now's general counsel received an urgent message from the company's outside law firm. Multiple legal actions filed naming both Secure Now and Richard Reynolds personally as defendants. Securities fraud allegations, misappropriation of shareholder assets, breach of fiduciary duty to minority investors. The cascade continued as financial journalists began calling Secure Now's communications department, requesting comment on breaking allegations of financial impropriety. 3 business news websites simultaneously published investigative pieces questioning the company's recent acquisitions and financing structure, each mentioning anonymous whistleblower documents that suggested potential regulatory violations. By 9:05 a.m., Meridian Capital's Risk Management Committee had convened an emergency meeting to assess their exposure. The package Leslie had arranged for them, containing both evidence of Richard's undisclosed relationship with Cynthia Mercer and documentation of his attempts to seize control of my assets, had arrived with perfect timing to compound their concerns about SecureNow's financial reporting. Richard has left his attorney's office and is heading to SecureNow headquarters, Mira updated. Driving erratically, exceeding speed limit twice. Appears to be making multiple phone calls while driving. The observation confirmed our psychological assessment. Under pressure, Richard abandoned careful calculation for reactive crisis management, a vulnerability we had specifically designed our strategy to exploit. At 9:32 a.m., as Richard arrived at SecureNow, James reported the most significant development. Yet, Meridian Capital has issued formal notice of covenant review based on material concerns regarding financial disclosures and corporate governance. They're demanding full access to internal finances and immediate board representation. This was the linchpin of our strategy. Meridian's intervention created institutional pressure that Richard couldn't simply dismiss or control. Their loan covenants gave them significant leverage, including the right to accelerate repayment terms or convert debt to equity under specific conditions of default. Perfect timing, I responded to James. Activate the second-tier media contacts. Now. The second wave of our media strategy involved more prominent business publications receiving detailed information about the legal challenges and regulatory concerns. Unlike the initial coverage, which raised questions, this round would present specific allegations backed by documentation, creating the impression of rapidly escalating problems rather than speculative concerns. By 10:15 a.m., Richard's carefully constructed facade was crumbling from all directions. The board members were demanding emergency briefings. Investors were calling for explanations of the media allegations. Meridian's representatives were insisting on immediate access to financial records. The company's stock had been halted pending clarification of the breaking news. Through it all, I monitored from my mountain sanctuary, directing our team's responses with the precision of a conductor leading a complex symphony. Each new development triggered pre-planned counteractions, amplifying Richard's challenges while strengthening our position. My phone rang, Richard's number appearing on the screen for the first time outside our scheduled evening calls. I had anticipated this desperate outreach and prepared accordingly. After 4 rings, the call diverted to voicemail as planned. He needed to believe I remained unavailable, contained within the rehabilitation center's structured environment. His message, when it arrived, revealed a man struggling to maintain control. "Sophia, it's me. There's some confusion with the legal system, some paperwork mix-up creating complications. Nothing for you to worry about. I'm handling everything. Just, if the rehab center staff mention anything about legal documents or court proceedings, ignore it. It's a clerical error we're resolving. Focus on your recovery. I'll explain everything during our regular call tonight." The attempt to preemptively neutralize any information that might reach me through the rehabilitation center staff confirmed our assessment of his strategy. He still believed I was isolated, receiving information only through channels he controlled. Forwarded the voicemail to Leslie with a single instruction. Add to evidence file, attempted concealment. By noon, the situation had progressed beyond Richard's ability to contain. SecureNow's legal team had identified the existence of the shareholder coalition we had assembled, original investors representing 31% of pre-expansion equity who had aligned against Richard's leadership. Combined with the 22% I was claiming through the share transfer challenge, the coalition represented a potential voting majority. Emergency board meeting scheduled for 4 p.m., James reported. Agenda includes leadership confidence vote and strategic response to legal challenges. 3 board members have already contacted outside counsel separate from company representation. Our strategy was accelerating faster than even the most optimistic projections. Richard's position was eroding not just externally through legal and financial challenges, but internally as the board began considering their own liability exposure. Time. To introduce the final element, I instructed Leslie. Activate the regulatory notification protocol. This phase involved providing specific evidence of potential securities violations to the appropriate regulatory bodies, carefully structured to trigger preliminary inquiry without immediate enforcement action. The goal wasn't prosecution, but additional pressure on Richard and the board, creating leverage for our negotiated resolution. As these events unfolded, I conducted my daily physical therapy session with Elena, pushing through exercises with renewed determination. The timeline had compressed beyond our initial planning. I needed to be physically prepared for public appearance sooner than anticipated. "Your hip stability has improved dramatically," Elena noted as I completed a series of balance challenges. "Still compensating slightly on the left side during rotational movements, but the progress is remarkable given the compressed timeline." "How close are we to functional mobility for public settings?" I asked, wiping perspiration from my face. Elena considered the question with professional assessment. "You can manage controlled environments now, level surfaces, limited standing duration, minimal stair navigation. Not pain-free, but functional. With proper planning and positioning, you could handle a business setting for up to 2 hours." This was the critical threshold we had been working toward. Sufficient recovery for me to physically appear at strategic moments without revealing the full extent of ongoing limitations. The psychological impact of my unexpected presence would far outweigh any perceived physical weakness. "Perfect," I replied, already mentally integrating this capability into our evolving strategy. "Let's continue focusing on endurance and transitional movements." By mid-afternoon, Richard had attempted to call me 3 more times, each message more urgent than the last. His growing desperation was evident in both tone and content. Mentions of misunderstandings and temporary complications that he was personally addressing. The fiction that everything remained under control was crumbling even in his own narrative. At 3:45 p.m., 15 minutes before SecureNow's emergency board meeting, we executed the next phase of our strategy. Leslie filed our comprehensive counterproposal with both the court and SecureNow's corporate counsel simultaneously. The document detailed evidence of Richard's fraudulent financial activities, documentation of his breach of fiduciary duty analysis, of SecureNow's true financial position, a structured reorganization plan that would protect the company's government contracts while addressing regulatory concerns, leadership transition proposal with board representation for original investors. Most critically, the proposal included a conditional settlement offer. In exchange for Richard's immediate resignation, return of all misappropriated funds, and transfer of his controlling interest to the reformed board, we would not pursue criminal charges related to the financial fraud. Delivery confirmed to all 7 board members and corporate counsel, Leslie reported at 3:52 p.m. Document accessed by 5 recipients already. The timing was precisely calculated. Board members heading into a crisis meeting now had a potential resolution pathway, one that protected the company's contracts and operations while isolating liability to Richard personally. The contrast between continuing to support his increasingly untenable position and accepting our structured solution created the classic corporate governance inflection point we had designed. At 4:17 p.m., James reported from his monitoring of internal communications. Board entered closed-door session after 12 minutes of preliminary discussion. Richard excluded from deliberations based on conflict of interest assertion by 3 members. Richard's exclusion from the board's discussion represented a critical turning point. He had lost the narrative control that had been central to his strategy from the beginning, first with me, now with the board. Without his presence to shape interpretation of events, the raw evidence we had provided would speak for itself. Cynthia Mercer has been placed on administrative leave by Meridian pending internal review, Mira added from her surveillance position. Security escorted her from the building approximately 30 minutes ago. This development, while not specifically part of our planning, represented a fortunate acceleration. Meridian's rapid response to the evidence of Cynthia's undisclosed relationship with Richard suggested they were positioning themselves to avoid association with any impropriety, precisely the institutional self-protection reflex we had anticipated as EEI. Reports continued flowing in from our distributed team. I made the most significant decision of our operation thus far. Prepare for my public emergence. Schedule for tomorrow morning, contingent on board decision outcomes. The response from Leslie came with appropriate caution. Confirm you're physically ready for this acceleration. Once you're publicly visible, we lose the strategic advantage of your supposed incapacity. Confirmed, I replied. The advantage has served its purpose. We're transitioning to the confrontation phase where my visible presence creates maximum impact. For the remainder of the afternoon, we monitored the board's extended closed-door session through both James's digital access and Mira's physical surveillance. Reports of raised voices occasionally emerged, along with requests for specific financial documentation and legal consultations with outside counsel. At 6:43 p.m., nearly 3 hours into what had been scheduled as a 1-hour emergency meeting, the board emerged with a decision. James's access to the company's secure messaging system captured the outcome moments before it was formally communicated. Board has voted 5-2 to suspend Richard pending investigation of financial allegations. Appointed CFO Marcus Chen as interim. CEO. Authorized negotiation team to engage with shareholder coalition representatives regarding proposed reorganization. The development exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The board had effectively removed Richard from operational control and opened direct communication channels with our coalition, all within 12 hours of our coordinated counteroffensive. Richard's reaction came within minutes, captured by Mira's surveillance. Subject exited the boardroom shouting about betrayal and corporate cowardice. Security was called but not required to intervene. Subject departed premises at 6:58 p.m., driving erratically. The psychological profile our team had developed predicted exactly this response. When institutional structures failed to support his position, Richard would perceive it as personal. Betrayal rather than recognition of his misconduct. This perception would drive increasingly erratic behavior, further undermining any remaining credibility. As expected, Richard's next move was to attempt direct contact with me, the person he still believed was safely contained and manipulable. His call came at 7:22 p.m., which I allowed to go to voicemail as with his previous attempts. The message revealed a man oscillating between anger and attempted manipulation. Sophia, we need to talk immediately. There's a coordinated attack happening. Against me, against us, at the company. Someone's using your medical situation to create legal complications. I'm trying to protect our interests but facing resistance from people who don't understand the situation. Call me the moment you get this. It's urgent we present a united front. I forwarded the message to Leslie with the instruction. Add to evidence file, attempted manipulation and misrepresentation. By 8:30 p.m., Richard had made a critical mistake we had anticipated in our planning. He attempted to access the rehabilitation center outside of visiting hours, demanding to see me, despite staff explanations about treatment protocols. Subject became verbally aggressive with reception staff, Mira reported from her surveillance position. Security was called. He left before their arrival but made threatening comments about legal consequences for restricting access to his wife. The incident would be documented by rehabilitation center staff, creating additional evidence of erratic behavior that supported our challenge to his guardianship petition. Each reaction to our strategy not only failed to advance his position, but actively strengthened our counter case. As evening deepened, our team continued monitoring developments while preparing for the next phase. Leslie finalized arrangements for my public appearance, including security protocols and media management. James maintained surveillance of SecureNow's internal communications, tracking the board's engagement with our coalition representatives. Mira's team kept Richard under discreet observation, documenting his movements and interactions. I focused on final physical preparations with Elena, who had agreed to remain at the cabin overnight to assist with morning mobility protocols. The cumulative stress of the day's events had intensified pain levels, requiring careful management, to ensure I would be functionally mobile for the critical appearances ahead. "Remember that perception matters more than perfection tomorrow," Elena advised as she helped me complete the evening stretching routine. "Strategic positioning will minimize visible limitations. Brief standing periods with properly placed support points, seated negotiations for extended discussions." Her practical approach to managing my public reemergence aligned perfectly with our strategic objectives. I didn't need to demonstrate complete recovery, just sufficient presence to shatter Richard's narrative of my incapacity. At 10:17 p.m., Richard made his final move of the day, one that confirmed the complete unraveling of his calculated self-control. He appeared at Leslie's home, clearly intoxicated, demanding to know her involvement in the conspiracy against him. "Subject is exhibiting signs of significant impairment," Mira reported from her surveillance position. "Slurred speech, unsteady, gait, elevated volume. Leslie has not engaged directly, but called police through the security system." This final misstep completed the day's devastating reversal of Richard's position. From a confident corporate leader executing a carefully planned takeover of my assets that morning, he had deteriorated to an intoxicated, aggressive man harassing a prominent attorney at her home by evening, all documented by multiple witnesses. The police response was prompt and professional. Richard was not arrested but received a formal warning and was escorted from the property, another documented incident that further undermined his credibility and supported our legal position. As midnight approached, I reviewed the day's extraordinary developments with Leslie via secure video call. Her assessment was characteristically precise. "Richard has lost operational control of the company, board support, and credibility with financial partners. His legal position is compromised by documented erratic behavior. The guardianship petition is effectively dead." "And the company transition?" I asked, focusing on the ultimate objective beyond Richard's personal downfall. "Negotiations with the board team begin at 9 a.m. tomorrow," Leslie confirmed. "Their primary concern is protecting government contracts and preventing regulatory intervention. Our coalition offers exactly that assurance through the proposed leadership structure." "Perfect timing for my appearance," I noted. Their relief at finding a rational, functioning counterparty rather than the incapacitated victim Richard portrayed will accelerate agreement. Leslie nodded, though her expression carried a note of concern. "Are you certain you're ready for direct confrontation with Richard? He's becoming increasingly unstable. Security considerations aside, the emotional impact shouldn't be underestimated." The question deserved honest reflection. Throughout our counteroffensive planning, I had maintained analytical distance from the personal dimensions of Richard's betrayal, focusing on strategic objectives rather than emotional responses. Yet Leslie was right to highlight the psychological challenge of face-to-face confrontation with the man who had not only betrayed our marriage, but potentially orchestrated the accident that had nearly killed me. "I'm ready," I replied after careful consideration. "Not because it will be easy emotionally, but because it's necessary strategically. Richard needs to see that I've been the architect of his downfall, that his fundamental miscalculation was underestimating me." After concluding arrangements for the morning's carefully choreographed appearance, I attempted sleep despite the persistent combination of physical pain and mental hypervigilance. Tomorrow would require every ounce of strength and focus I could muster, the culmination of our counteroffensive and the moment Richard would finally understand the true extent of his miscalculation. As I drifted toward uneasy sleep, my thoughts returned to the hospital room where this journey had begun, where I had first discovered the betrayal that had shattered not just bones, but the foundations of the life I had believed secure. The anger that had initially fueled my response had transformed over time into something colder and more focused. absolute determination to reclaim not just what had been taken, but what should have been protected. Richard had seen my injuries as opportunity, my trust as vulnerability, my professional accomplishments as irrelevant to his assessment of my capabilities. Tomorrow he would discover that in underestimating me so completely, he had engineered not my imprisonment, but his own downfall. The morning arrived with thin mountain light filtering through pine branches. Elena arrived at 6 a.m. as planned to begin the intensified mobility preparation, a carefully designed sequence of stretches, compression therapy, and targeted exercises to optimize functional movement for the critical appearances ahead. Pain management strategy? She asked, professional focus overriding any curiosity about the day's unusual objectives. Minimally effective dose, I replied, accepting the measured balance between pain control and mental clarity. I need functional, movement and sharp cognition. I can manage discomfort. By 7:30 a.m., reports began flowing in from our team members already in position. The Secure Now headquarters showed unusually early activity, with board members and legal counsel arriving for pre-negotiation briefings. Meridian Capital had dispatched a senior risk management team to participate in discussions regarding loan covenant compliance. Most significantly, Richard had arrived looking visibly disheveled, unusual for a man typically meticulous about professional appearance. Subject appears to have slept in his car, Mira reported. Same clothing as yesterday, significantly wrinkled. Has been denied access to his office based on a suspension order. Currently in heated discussion with security in the main lobby. The observation confirmed our psychological assessment. Under severe pressure, Richard abandoned strategic thinking for emotional reaction. Precisely the vulnerability our plan had been designed to exploit. His appearance at the company, despite formal suspension, demonstrated his inability to accept the collapse of his position. At 8:15 a.m., I began the journey from mountain sanctuary to corporate confrontation. The drive would take approximately 45 minutes, carefully timed to place my arrival at Secure Now headquarters during the initial phase of negotiations between the board team and our coalition representatives. Leslie called with a final update before departing separately. Richard is now in the building. Board chairman authorized temporary access for him to collect personal items under security supervision. He's demanding to participate in coalition negotiations, but has been refused based on conflict of interest. Perfect, I replied. His presence in the building during my arrival creates the maximum impact scenario we discussed. As our vehicle navigated down from the mountains toward the city, I mentally prepared for the culmination of our counteroffensive. The physical pain remained present but manageable, the strategic preparation complete, the team positioned for coordinated execution. The confirmation of Richard's comprehensive betrayal, financial, professional, and personal, had been fully documented through our investigative efforts. The evidence we had assembled revealed not just isolated actions, but a calculated, long-term strategy to appropriate my assets, eliminate my professional standing, and potentially even orchestrate the accident that had nearly ended my life. Today, that betrayal would be not just confirmed, but conclusively addressed. Through the systematic dismantling of everything Richard had attempted to build using my stolen resources. Our vehicle pulled into the Secure Now parking complex at precisely 9:07 a.m., timing coordinated with Mira's confirmation that coalition negotiations had begun in the main conference room. Security personnel who had been quietly briefed by James's contacts within the company were waiting to escort me directly to the executive floor, bypassing standard check-in procedures. As I carefully exited the vehicle, supported by Elena's steadying hand, I straightened to my full height, despite the protest from healing bones. The Secure Now headquarters, a glass and steel structure Richard had proudly showcased during its construction 3 years earlier, loomed ahead, its reflective surfaces, masking the corporate drama unfolding within. Ready? Elena asked, her professional assessment taking in my posture and movement quality. I nodded. balancing the specialized cane that provided necessary support while projecting understated elegance rather than medical necessity. Perfectly ready to reclaim what's mine. With measured steps that concealed the effort each movement required, I began walking toward the building entrance. The security team moved into protective formation around me, their presence communicating institutional recognition of my authority even before I spoke a single word. Behind the professional composure I had cultivated through years of high stakes, corporate negotiations, a single thought provided unexpected emotional clarity. Richard had believed me broken beyond recovery, incapable of challenging his betrayal. He was about to discover how catastrophically he had underestimated both my resilience and my resolve. The executive floor of Secure Now headquarters had always exuded a particular energy, ambitious, competitive, relentlessly forward-moving. Today, that energy had transformed into something entirely different, crisis and chaos barely contained beneath a veneer of corporate decorum. As the elevator doors opened, I noted the tangible shift in atmosphere. Staff members moved with the hurried precision that accompanies organizational upheaval, their hushed conversations ceasing abruptly as they registered my presence. Recognition dawned in their expressions: confusion, shock, and in some cases, poorly concealed alarm. Ms. Calloway, the executive assistant stationed at the reception desk, stammered, rising halfway from her chair. We didn't expect— Hello, Diane, I replied with calm professionalism, as if my appearance after 3 months of absence following a near-fatal accident and in the midst of corporate meltdown were entirely routine. I understand the board is meeting with investor representatives in the main conference room. Her eyes darted toward the security team accompanying me, then back to my face. Yes, but Mr. Reynolds specifically instructed— Mr. Reynolds has been suspended from his duties, I interrupted gently. As verified by board action yesterday evening, I believe you received the official notification. Before she could respond, Leslie emerged from the corridor leading to the executive offices, her timing as precise as everything else in our orchestrated counteroffensive. Sophia, perfect timing, she greeted me with practiced casualness. The coalition representatives were just asking when you would arrive. She turned to the still stunned assistant. Please inform the board chairman that Ms. Calloway is here for the scheduled discussion. The authority in Leslie's tone activated Diane's professional instincts. She lifted her phone, murmuring a brief message while continuing to glance between us with visible uncertainty. The chairman is coming out to greet you personally, she reported after replacing the receiver. Within moments, Harold Winters, Secure Now's board chairman and one of the original investors Richard had sidelined during his aggressive expansion, appeared in the corridor. His expression betrayed momentary shock at my physical presence before corporate composure reasserted itself. Ms. Calloway, he said, extending his hand with careful restraint, clearly uncertain about my physical capabilities. This is unexpected. We were informed you were in rehabilitation with limited communication access. A strategic misrepresentation, I replied, meeting his handshake with deliberate firmness. My recovery has progressed sufficiently to address the situation personally. Harold's gaze assessed me with new consideration, calculating risks, opportunities, and implications with the precision that had made him a successful venture capitalist. Whatever conclusions he reached prompted a decisive nod. The board would welcome your direct input on the current situation, he said, gesturing toward the conference room. Particularly given the comprehensive proposal your representatives have presented. As we moved toward the meeting, I maintained the careful walking rhythm Elena had helped me perfect. Deliberate but not hesitant, the specialized cane providing stability without suggesting weakness. Each step represented months of painful rehabilitation compressed into accelerated recovery. Each movement a victory over both physical trauma and Richard's assumption of my helplessness. The conversations within the conference room fell silent as I entered. Around the polished table sat the key players in Secure Now's governance: board members, legal counsel, financial advisors, and representatives from our investor coalition. Their collective attention focused on me with an intensity that would have been unnerving had I not prepared so thoroughly for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harold announced with formal precision, "Ms. Sophia Calloway has joined us to participate directly in these discussions." The ensuing silence carried multiple layers of recalculation: professional, strategic, legal, as each person adjusted their understanding of the situation. I had transformed instantly from abstract concept, the incapacitated wife, to physical presence, from presumed victim to evident strategist. I selected a chair positioned for maximum visibility while minimizing standing duration, as Elena had recommended. Leslie took the adjacent seat, subtly positioning herself to provide support if needed while maintaining the appearance of equal partnership rather than assistance. "Thank you for accommodating my unexpected appearance," I began, my voice carrying the calm authority I had cultivated through years of presenting research findings to skeptical pharmaceutical executives. "I believe the documentation provided by my legal team has clarified both the nature of the situation and our proposed resolution pathway." Marcus Chen, Secure Now's CFO and now interim CEO, was the first to recover from the collective surprise. "The board has reviewed your allegations regarding unauthorized financial transactions conducted by Mr. Reynolds," he stated, his accounting precision evident even in crisis. "Our preliminary verification suggests considerable irregularities, requiring full investigation." "Not allegations, Mr. Chen. Documented facts," I corrected gently. "The forensic accounting analysis provided to the board demonstrates systematic transfer of funds from my accounts to offshore holdings, fraudulent use of my forged signature on corporate documents, and improper leveraging of misappropriated assets for company acquisitions." The corporate counsel shifted uncomfortably. "While these matters are deeply concerning and merit thorough investigation, the immediate issue facing the board is stabilizing the company's position with Meridian Capital and preventing potential regulatory intervention regarding government contracts." "Precisely why our proposal provides the most efficient resolution pathway," Leslie interjected smoothly. "The structured reorganization addresses Meridian's concerns while maintaining contractual compliance with government entities. The alternative, protracted litigation, potential criminal proceedings, and inevitable media scrutiny, creates significant risk to shareholder value and contract retention." The strategic framing redirected the discussion exactly as we had planned. Board members' questions shifted from challenging our allegations to exploring the feasibility of our proposed reorganization, a transition from defensive resistance to practical problem-solving. As the conversation progressed, I noted with satisfaction how completely our preparation had anticipated each concern raised. Government contract compliance? Our proposal included a governance structure specifically designed to satisfy federal requirements. Meridian's loan covenants? The restructured equity distribution would address their risk exposure while maintaining operational continuity. Shareholder interests? The projected stabilization would protect value more effectively than any alternative approach. 20 minutes into the discussion, the conference room door opened abruptly. Richard stood in the doorway, his usually immaculate appearance noticeably disheveled, wrinkled shirt, tie askew, eyes reflecting the combination of sleeplessness and stress our counteroffensive had deliberately induced. For a moment, he didn't register my presence, his attention focused on the board chairman. "Harold, this is ridiculous. You can't possibly be considering—" His voice died mid-sentence as his gaze found me. The sequence of emotions crossing his face would have been almost comical in another context. Confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally, cold realization. "Sophia?" My name emerged as a question rather than a greeting. "What are you? How are you here?" I met his gaze with calm professionalism, as if addressing a particularly difficult colleague rather than a husband who had systematically betrayed me while I recovered from near-fatal injuries. "Hello, Richard. I believe the board was just reviewing documentation regarding your unauthorized financial activities during my hospitalization." His expression hardened as the implications registered. "You're behind this," he stated flatly. "The legal filings, the media leaks, the investor coalition, this is your doing. An appropriate response to your actions," I replied evenly. "The systematic draining of my accounts, forging my signature on share transfers, attempting to have me declared mentally incompetent, all while planning your future with Cynthia Mercer, using resources built through our partnership." The mention of Cynthia visibly rattled him, confirming our assessment that he had believed that relationship was completely hidden. His gaze darted around the room, assessing how much others knew, calculating potential responses. "This is absurd," he attempted, turning to address the board rather than me. "My wife suffered a traumatic brain injury. Her perception is compromised by medication and cognitive impairment. Whatever she believes is happening is documented through comprehensive forensic financial analysis," I interrupted calmly. "The evidence doesn't require my perception, Richard. The transaction records, falsified signatures, and undisclosed relationships speak for themselves." Harold cleared his throat with uncomfortable authority. "Richard, you've been suspended pending investigation of these matters. Your presence at this meeting is inappropriate and potentially prejudicial to your legal position. I must ask you to leave immediately." "This is my company," Richard responded, voice rising with indignation. "Built from nothing into a government contractor with 9-figure potential. And you're letting my injured wife and her manipulative friends destroy everything based on misunderstandings and technical irregularities?" The characterization was so fundamentally disconnected from the documented reality that several board members exchanged concerned glances. Richard's inability to recognize the severity of his position or to offer any substantive defense beyond attacking my credibility was undermining any remaining support he might have maintained. "The technical irregularities include $1.4 million transferred from my accounts without authorization," I stated, my voice remaining measured despite the surge of controlled anger. "They include forging my signature on corporate documents. They include attempting to have me declared incompetent while I recovered from injuries that were suspiciously timed to facilitate your financial maneuvers." The implication of potential involvement in my accident sent a ripple of reaction through the room. It was the first time this dimension had been introduced to the broader audience, though Leslie had strategically included supporting documentation in materials provided to select board members. Richard's face flushed with either rage or panic, perhaps both. "That's an outrageous insinuation. You can't possibly believe I had anything to do with your accident." "The $50,000 payment to the truck driver from your college roommate's shell company suggests otherwise," I replied, revealing another piece of our comprehensive investigation, as does the timing of your relationship with Cynthia Mercer, which our evidence shows began 4 months before my accident, coinciding precisely with the initiation of acquisition discussions for quantum defense. The systematic dismantling of his narrative was having its intended effect. With each revealed piece of evidence, Richard's position deteriorated further, his responses becoming increasingly defensive and disjointed. "Security will escort you from the premises," Harold stated with finality, gesturing toward the guards who had appeared in the doorway. "The board will continue discussions regarding the proposed reorganization. Your legal counsel will be notified of any decisions affecting your position." As security personnel moved to implement the directive, Richard made a final, desperate attempt to regain control. "Sophia, you need to understand what's happening here. These people—" He gestured toward the board members and our coalition representatives. "They're using your medical situation to orchestrate a takeover. This isn't about protecting you. It's about stealing what we built together." The calculated appeal to our former partnership might have been effective had I not spent months documenting exactly how comprehensively he had betrayed that very concept. his attempt to position himself as the protector of our shared interests, while actively destroying them, represented the ultimate irony. "What we built together," I repeated, allowing the phrase to hang momentarily in the conference room air. "That's precisely what this is about, Richard. You saw my incapacitation as an opportunity to appropriate everything we built. You drained our savings, transferred my company shares, and planned to have me declared incompetent, all while moving your girlfriend into a penthouse purchased with my stolen funds." The systematic enumeration of his betrayals, delivered without emotional inflection, carried more impact than any angry accusation could have achieved. Several board members visibly recoiled at the comprehensive nature of the violations described. "You've left no alternative but this formal reclamation," I concluded, as security personnel positioned themselves on either side of him. Every opportunity for honest partnership was systematically violated. As Richard was escorted from the conference room, his expression reflected the dawning recognition of his catastrophic miscalculation. He had believed me helpless, contained, and manipulable. The reality now confronting him was diametrically opposed to that comfortable assumption. I had orchestrated his complete professional and personal unraveling from the very hospital bed, where he taught me safely neutralized. The remainder of the board meeting proceeded with remarkable efficiency. With Richard's disruptive presence removed and the full scope of his actions now evident to all participants, the proposed reorganization gained immediate traction as the most viable path forward. By early afternoon, the framework agreement had been established. The board would accept our coalition's restructuring proposal, including restoration of my rightful ownership position, appointment of new executive leadership, and corporate governance reforms designed to prevent similar abuses. In exchange, we would support the company's efforts to maintain government contract compliance and satisfy Meridian Capital's security requirements. Most significantly, the agreement included a critical personal concession. In exchange for Richard's immediate resignation, surrender of all misappropriated funds, and comprehensive non-compete commitment, we would not pursue criminal charges related to the financial fraud. The potential connection to my accident remained uninvestigated territory, a deliberate strategic decision that provided leverage without entering the more complex evidentiary challenges of proving intent. As the meeting concluded, Harold approached, with the careful consideration of someone recalibrating a previously misjudged relationship. "Your strategic management of this situation has been remarkable," he observed, "particularly given the circumstances of your recovery. Physical limitation doesn't equate to strategic incapacity," I replied simply, something Richard fundamentally failed to understand. Harold nodded thoughtfully. "The board would welcome your continued involvement in the transition process, assuming your health permits. Your understanding of both the company's history and recent complications provides valuable perspective." The invitation represented more than professional courtesy. It acknowledged my legitimate role in the organization Richard had attempted to appropriate. The recognition carried particular satisfaction after months of systematic erasure from the company I had helped build. "I'll remain involved through the leadership transition," I confirmed, "though my primary focus will continue to be physical rehabilitation." As we prepared to depart, Leslie provided a final update from our surveillance team. Richard had been escorted from the building and was currently meeting with his attorney, presumably reviewing the settlement framework and his rapidly diminishing options. "His legal position is untenable," Leslie observed as our car departed the corporate complex. "The documentation is comprehensive, witness statements damning, and institutional support evaporated. Accepting the settlement offer represents his only viable pathway to avoiding criminal prosecution." The assessment was accurate, but strangely unsatisfying. Throughout our counteroffensive planning, I had maintained a singular focus on reclamation, recovering stolen assets, restoring professional standing, regaining control of resources built through years of partnership. The objective had been achieved with remarkable efficiency, yet the victory felt incomplete in ways I hadn't anticipated. He genuinely believed I was incapable of challenging him, I observed as we navigated back toward the mountain sanctuary. Not just physically, limited but fundamentally diminished. That perception, that someone who had shared my life for 12 years could so completely misjudge my essential nature, is somehow more disturbing than the financial betrayal. Leslie considered this with the thoughtful attention that made her exceptional both as attorney and friend. People reveal themselves through crises, both in how they respond to their own challenges and how they treat others during vulnerability. Richard showed you exactly who he is when he believed you couldn't hold him accountable. The observation carried an uncomfortable truth. The man I had believed my partner had been revealed as something fundamentally different when circumstances created opportunity for exploitation rather than protection. The recognition wasn't just about Richard's character, but about the nature of partnership itself, how it could appear solid while containing fatal structural weaknesses invisible until stress exposed them. 3 days later, Richard accepted the settlement agreement. The terms were precisely as our team had structured: complete financial restitution, resignation from all corporate positions, comprehensive non-compete restrictions, and termination of the fraudulent guardianship petition. In exchange, we would not pursue criminal charges related to the documented financial fraud. The agreement included no acknowledgement of potential involvement in my accident. The evidence remained circumstantial despite the suspicious timing and financial connections. This unresolved dimension would likely remain so, a permanent question mark in the narrative of betrayal and reclamation. "He's leaving the country," Mira reported during her final briefing. "One-way ticket to Singapore departing next week. The penthouse has been listed for sale. Personal belongings already in storage. The information should have provided closure. Richard's complete removal from the life he had attempted to steal represented the ultimate confirmation of our counteroffensive success." Yet I found myself contemplating not the victory, but the comprehensive collapse of everything I had believed secure. A marriage I had thought based on partnership, a husband I had trusted during my greatest vulnerability, a future I had planned with someone capable of calculating my elimination when financially expedient. "The hardest recoveries aren't physical," Elena observed during our therapy session. That afternoon, her insight extending beyond professional boundaries. "Bones heal according to predictable patterns. Trust doesn't." The observation captured perfectly the unexpected aftermath of our successful reclamation. The financial assets had been recovered, professional standing restored, corporate control reestablished, yet the foundation of trust that had undergirded my understanding of partnership had been irreparably shattered. 6 weeks later, I stood on the deck of the mountain cabin that had served as both recovery sanctuary and strategic headquarters, watching autumn colors transform the landscape. My physical rehabilitation had progressed to the point where Elena now described my remaining limitations as normal adaptation patterns rather than ongoing disability. The specialized cane had been replaced by occasional hikes through the surrounding forest, each venture slightly longer than the last. Secure Now had stabilized under new leadership, with the restructured board implementing governance reforms designed to prevent similar concentrations of unchecked authority. My ownership position had been fully restored, though I had chosen to maintain involvement as strategic advisor rather than returning to operational roles. My experiences had reinforced the value of maintaining professional diversity rather than consolidating within single entities. Most significantly, the comprehensive evidence our team had assembled regarding financial fraud had prompted broader regulatory review of similar vulnerabilities. Leslie was now consulting with legislative committees developing enhanced protections against exploitation during medical incapacity, a systemic reform emerging from personal exploitation. The legal aftermath of Richard's betrayal had concluded with mechanical precision. Assets returned, agreements signed, corporate structures reorganized. The emotional aftermath remained more complex. Not simple recovery, but fundamental recalibration of how I understood partnership, trust, and my own capacity for both strategic response and ongoing vulnerability. My phone chimed with a message from James. Final confirmation, subject departed Singapore for an untraceable destination. Surveillance discontinued per protocol. The notification represented the official conclusion of our operation. Richard had removed himself, not just from my life, but from any environment where accountability might reach him. A self-imposed exile that represented its own form of consequence. I closed the surveillance channel permanently, a symbolic act marking transition from reactive defense to proactive reconstruction. The betrayal had revealed devastating weaknesses in what I had believed secure, yet the response had demonstrated capacity for strategic resilience I might never have discovered without that catalyzing crisis. The financial assets Richard had attempted to steal had been reclaimed completely. The company he had tried to appropriate was now under governance that prevented similar exploitation. The life he had planned to eliminate continued with renewed understanding of both vulnerability and strength. In underestimating me so catastrophically, seeing physical injury as total incapacitation, professional specialization as strategic limitation, trust as exploitable weakness, Richard had engineered not my destruction but his own comprehensive defeat. As mountain twilight settled across the landscape, I contemplated the complex legacy of betrayal and reclamation. The experience had stripped away comfortable illusions about partnership security, while revealing unexpected capacity for strategic response under extreme duress. The losses were real and significant, yet they had catalyzed discoveries that might otherwise have remained dormant. I had entered the hospital as one person and emerged, months later, as someone fundamentally transformed, not just by physical trauma, but by the strategic demands of responding to comprehensive betrayal. The recovery wasn't simply a return to previous state, but evolution into something different, more vigilant regarding vulnerability, more conscious of partnership foundations, more aware of capacity for both trust and strategic self-protection. The cabin that had sheltered both physical healing and counteroffensive planning would soon return to its original purpose as vacation retreat. My own return to the wider world would carry forward the lessons crystallized within its walls. Physical. Limitation doesn't preclude strategic capacity. Trust requires ongoing verification. Partnership demands protection rather than exploitation during vulnerability. Most significantly, the experience had demonstrated the dangerous miscalculation represented by Richard's fundamental assumption. That injury equated to incapacity. That vulnerability created opportunity for exploitation rather than obligation for protection. His catastrophic underestimation had transformed potential victims into architects of comprehensive counter-response. As darkness completed its descent over the mountain landscape, I contemplated the journey from hospital bed to corporate reclamation, with a complex mixture of satisfaction and sobriety. The victory had been comprehensive, yet carried permanent reminders of partnership fragility. The recovery had restored financial assets, yet reframed understanding of security foundations. Perhaps the most significant outcome wasn't the reclaimed company or recovered funds, but the demonstrated reminder that appearance of vulnerability doesn't equate to absence of capacity, that strategic strength often resides precisely where others perceive only weakness. Richard had seen hospital confinement and physical injury as creating perfect opportunities for exploitation. He had failed to recognize that confinement created a focused strategic environment, that injury catalyzed fierce determination, that betrayal during vulnerability generated not helplessness, but devastating counter-response. In the end, his most catastrophic miscalculation wasn't financial fraud or corporate manipulation, but a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was beneath. The external circumstances of temporary physical limitation, a strategic analyst whose capacity for organized response became fully activated precisely when he believed it most thoroughly neutralized. The company he had sacrificed our marriage to control was now beyond his reach. The funds he had systematically stolen had been completely restored. The future he had calculated based on my elimination continued without him, transformed by the very crisis he had engineered. While I was in the hospital, my husband took my savings, so I took his entire company, and in the process, discovered a capacity for strategic response that might have remained dormant without the catalyzing betrayal that demanded its full expression. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.